In part 3 of this series, we'll be talking about the publication section. There are a couple questions that pop up every year about this section, one of which is, should you list your ARVO poster presentation as a published abstract as well? Personally, I did not include this as a peer-reviewed abstract, even though it technically does count. My reasoning was that I didn't do any extra work for this abstract publication as I would for any other normal poster presentation, and so it didn't feel right for me to double dip and include it twice. With that said, I don't think it makes or breaks your application whether you choose to list it twice or not. I would just be really thoughtful and conscientious about wanting to not seem like you're padding your application or adding more to it just to seem like you were more productive than you actually were. Another common question is whether grand rounds presentations should be listed under oral presentations. Some say no, with the thought that this section should be reserved for only podium presentations at conferences, and any smaller grand rounds presentations should be listed under the specialties specific electives under the program that you rotated at. In my case, however, I did do additional grand rounds presentations that weren't a part of an away rotation, and my mentor suggested to me that I should list them as an oral presentation instead. So to stay consistent and to avoid splitting up my grand rounds presentations into two separate sections, I chose to list them all under the oral presentation section. In general though, especially if you only presented at grand rounds during rotations, I would recommend probably listing them under specialty electives instead. Now moving on to formatting. When I initially wrote my first draft of my application, I had periods after each initial and also commas between the last and first names in the author lists. My reviewer told me it looked really messy and clunky that way, so by removing those periods and those commas between the first initial and the last name, it could look a lot cleaner. Also helpful to spell out acronyms for everything, even if they're super common conferences like AAO or ARVO. You also want to make sure that the way you're capitalizing all the titles are consistent. I also made the mistake of not being consistent with naming. Even if the official title of the conference is 2025 Annual So-and-so Conference, but then another conference is Annual Conference So-and-so 2025, you want to keep things consistent. Finally, a big reminder, anything you put on your application is fair game for interviews, even any publications that go in this other publication section. Before your interviews, go through your list and make sure you're prepared to answer any questions about what the study was about, what your role was, and what you learned from that experience. As a real example, once I was asked about an iWiki article I wrote, and another interview I was asked about my research gap year bookmarked article. So don't assume that they're only going to ask about the high impact peer-reviewed journal articles. Let me know if you have any questions, because in part 4 we're moving on to the honors and interest section.